Welcome to the Better Than Bitter Divorce Podcast, where we flip the script on divorce and show you how to have a more amicable divorce resolution. I'm your host, Tanya Licklider, a divorce coach, a certified life coach, and the mastermind behind the Better Than Bitter 5-step game plan course, where I help individuals build a pathway towards a more amicable divorce resolution. Each week, I'll bring you uplifting stories from people who've successfully experienced amicable separations, proving that divorce doesn't have to be a battleground. Whether you're overwhelmed with grief, struggling with custody and co-parenting, or just dealing with a high conflict individual, this podcast is here to guide you towards reclaiming your life and being what I know is possible, better than bitter. Hi, and welcome to Better Than Bitter podcast. Today we have Rachel Pedersen. Rachel is a social media strategist, a digital marketing phenom. She partners with entrepreneurs. She creates very disruptive creative campaigns that have exponential returns. But that is not all that Rachel Pedersen is. Rachel Pedersen overcame these statistical odds. She actually was a college dropout and resulted in alcoholism and ended up as a single mother in poverty. But she has dedicated her life to changing business growth. She was able to pull herself out of that. But the question is how did she get there? How did she end up as a single mother in poverty? How did she end up dropping out of college? And this is a divorce podcast. And we are here not to talk about Rachel's divorce because she's actually happily married. But we are here to hear about her parents' tumultuous divorce and what that did to her as a child and the lessons that I can teach you as a coach, hearing from Rachel as to what we can change in terms of your course, how you move your divorce forward. And I also am going to have Rachel talk about this life of possibilities, meaning how did she become a multiple business owner, making over $2 to $3 million a year, coming from not believing she had any skills whatsoever. So she's here to give you hope. She's here to give you those messages of what not to do in your divorce. And I am so happy to introduce Rachel. Welcome.
Tanya, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
You are in a happy marriage. You have 3 beautiful children. So we're not here to talk about your wonderful marriage. We are here to talk a little bit more about your past. And I know that it's never easy to talk about your past, and it's never easy to, reveal some of the most difficult times in your life. But I do want you to tell your story and tell your story about, what happened to you during your parents' divorce and, how you were able to turn your life around.
It's wild because I've actually never shared this before. So my parents, it was when I was 13 years old. I remember I got a call to the principal's office in middle school, which is so dramatic, in the middle of lunch. And I went to the principal's office and my mom and a few of her best friends were there and they picked me up. They took me away from school. And they revealed to me okay, your parents are getting a divorce, but it wasn't that simple. It was super dramatic, right? It was actually very traumatic, to be super honest. And it's interesting because that wasn't the signed, sealed, delivered version at all. My parents separated and got back together for 5 years, back and forth, back and forth. And it was just I never knew, are we going to be at dad's apartment today? Are you guys back together? What does this look like? And to be honest, their divorce set me up to be a complete statistic in every sense of the word,
What do you mean by statistic?
I mean, to become a single mother, because it was traumatic, dramatic. And I know divorce and traumatic divorces lead to more statistics across the board. To become an alcoholic, I actually probably should have been a lot worse than I was, if I'm going to be super honest. So I'm actually grateful that's the least of the damage I experienced throughout. But yeah, it was pretty rough. I probably should have been like a druggie. I probably should have been an addict in many more ways. I probably should have experienced a few divorces of my own, but goodness gracious, it was crazy, Tanya.
So your parents never delivered the message to you together. They didn't sit you down and say, Rachel, we just want you to know that, mom and dad have decided to divorce. They never said, it's not that, we love each other still. We're just not in love with each other. These are all the things at Better Than Bitter that we teach. We teach how to communicate as a couple to your children, and how important it is for that message to be delivered from a place of love, and for your child to not know that it's them, that they did nothing wrong. It is not something you did that has brought us apart. So why did they take you from school? Like, why was there a third party there to tell you that the divorce was happening?
So this is loaded, and I will touch on it lightly. There were certain parties involved between the two parents that were very drama obsessed. They loved the whole, like, how dramatic can we make this, and how many people can we involve, and how many, if that makes sense. It was almost histrionic in a way without diagnosing anyone. And so I realized early on, probably like when I was like 17 or 18, that one party loved the attention they could get from those types of announcements. And I was, a fatality emotionally through that,
And was this like a relative that like was seeking attention and said, hey, I'm going to stir the pot here. And okay. So your parents said, okay, we're getting divorced. Was there some level of relief on your side? Because did they fight all the time? Or was it like out of the blue? Because I know that a lot of children get, they never had any clue, right? Like, oh my God, my parents didn't even fight. And all next thing you know, they're telling me they're getting divorced.
No, it was highly violent. Like growing up, I remember there were times where like parents were like pushed down the stairs and like punching was happening, hitting. And I would just like listen or like get as close as I could to hear. I was the oldest of three girls. So I was always the one kind of like keeping watch, listening, making sure everyone was safe. No, it wasn't a safe upbringing. Like it was dangerous. And so I will say though, because we grew up so religious, like my dad was a pastor growing up, my mom was a worship leader, like I did not know that divorce was on the table. And so I had never met anyone who was divorced or met any friends whose parents were divorced. And so when I first heard, okay, we're getting a divorce, it was kind of like culture shock a little bit, if that makes sense. I just thought you stayed with the people regardless of how bad it was. And it was to the end always. So it was kind of weird. Yeah.
So for the listeners that are contemplating divorce and are worried about that religious piece of it, what is my community going to think of me? Because a lot of fear. So our emotions, as I teach, always come from a core place of fear, right? So your fear of what other people are going to think of you. You're fearful of your financial stability. You're fearful of loneliness. You are fearful of the unknown. And all of those fears is what create our emotions, right? So when you get fearful of what other people are going to think of you, it makes you feel very insecure, right? Or it makes you feel like a failure, right? And so I'm assuming that this big ordeal happened. Obviously, other people were involved. Your community, your church community now knows that this entire divorce is happening. What was that like for you as a kid to all of a sudden have that be displayed in such a grandiose way?
There was definitely some level of ostracization that happened. But the biggest thing in hindsight that I recognize is had my parents not divorced, ultimately, somebody would no longer be here. whether it was my mom or my dad or even me, like if I had gotten involved in those situations. And so when something is so volatile and so uncomfortable and so just the day to day is so awful, I really and truly believe that sometimes divorce might be the right option because everyone deserves to live in comfort. And watching my parents go through it, I mean, that's how I knew when I was with my daughter's father, my oldest daughter's father, like, this is not it. This is not what I'm going to marry into. I'm seeing similar patterns and I refuse to marry into something that is an inevitable divorce, you know?
I mean, that is actually super key that you had that level of awareness and understanding. And I think that's a fear of a lot of children of divorce, and they fear that they're doomed and they fear that, oh, I'm a product of divorce and therefore that's going to make me be somebody who gets divorced. So because you're in a happy marriage, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and talk to any adult children that might be listening and having that concern or feeling worried about their ability to have a healthy relationship and marriage.
For sure. So I remember, I met my husband, Paul, and we got married 13 days later, which is super fast. Normally that is a red flag, just a heads up. It's, my sisters called me the morning that I was going to marry him and they were so mad and they were like, Rachel, you've dated so many guys that were just losers, basically. And they were like, what about this one? And I was like, listen, I didn't marry any of the ones that were going to ultimately end up as divorces. I didn't end up with them. This is the one that I know is going to be worth it. This is the one that I know is going to stay. And so, like, there's something deep down that you can kind of rely on because you've seen more. You're less naive. When you are a child of parent divorces, you get to experience kind of third party, second party, and first party, what it looks like and what the patterns are. So I'm a big believer that if you trust your gut and look at the patterns you've seen over time, you can really and truly find the right marriage. And this sounds silly, but like, just don't marry the people you're going to divorce. I was
People don't get married thinking that they're going to get divorced. I mean, that kind of rolls into like I have this incredible blog. It's called the 20-Year Marriage Contract with the option to renew. And people are like, that's so morbid or like, that's so negative. I'm like, it's actually not, because when you think about it, it's like, yeah, we don't want to get divorced. But if we're signing a 20-year contract with the option to renew, wouldn't that make you want to work harder at your marriage? Because somebody could just say like, okay, I'm out, right? So if you truly love this person and you want to like make sure that it works, sometimes you have to give that like option to renew. It's kind of like playing on a sports team, right? So if you're the quarterback of the Patriots, right? You don't know if that contract renewal is going to take place. You know, you don't know if they're going to trade you for somebody else. So what do? You work hard. You put everything into every single day because you want to make sure that you get that contract re-signed. So I look at marriage and relationships in that same way. And, you know, most relationships die because of complacency. And differences, obviously, in like your financial view on life, or maybe it's the way you look at life, or maybe it's the way you raise your kids. But that's like, it's so great to be able to talk about that, like really at the beginning, because if you know your patterns of behavior, like if you were to write down all of your parents' patterns of behavior and you had to do this like 20-year marriage contract, you would roll these out and say, hey, I just want to make sure that we're aligned on these things because my parents were not.
I love that. And I also believe that over time, things change, which is one of the weirdest things to experience. My husband and I have been married for 11 years and we've experienced some massive changes. Like, okay, so who's in charge of cooking? Who's in charge of cleaning? Who's in charge of the kids? Like in the mornings, how about the evenings? And yeah, I think I love that concept of the contract and being able to communicate on the contract. I think that's fantastic.
So I want to dive a little deeper into the kind of ideas around damage control, because what I'm calling this podcast is divorce damage control. Can you give me some top tips that you believe that would help individuals who really do not want to go down this contentious path, on kind of ways that they can flip the switch, flip the script in their own minds to be able to not go down that? I mean, I'm hoping nobody pushes anybody down the stairs.
Yeah, me
Obviously,
too.
never want to get to the point
No.
of wanting to feel violent. And if you have that rage, like obviously get help to figure out why you have so much rage, because that's part of it. But
Mm-hmm.
there's also the softer side of that outside of the violence in your life. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are the top tips for people to say, like, you don't have to make that decision for it to be contentious?
Oh my goodness. So number one is going to be open and non-argued conversations. Like, do not add rebuttals. Like, people should be able to share, whether it's your partner, your spouse, your kids who are of an age to have conversations. Like, it should not be argued what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, where they're at. We do this actually every week. So we do like a family council, which we love. And yeah, we pull the whole family in and everyone gets to share what they're happy about and what they're frustrated about, whether it's so-and-so is leaving their lights on at night and it's keeping me awake, or so-and-so never plays with me. Like, it's so big, and we all usually end up crying throughout it because it's beautiful. That is way less damaging and way less expensive than a divorce, hands down. So I'm a huge fan of that. Number two, if you are going to make big, life altering decisions like a divorce, I think everyone deserves to be in on the conversation. Pull everyone together. The fact that, and you mentioned this, the fact that my parents never pulled everyone together and said like, oh, we're going to sit down and talk about this. That was hard. That was rough. It was confusing. It felt super extra, I guess, like violent or traumatic a little bit. It was bizarre. But if you're going to have big life altering moments, like, recognize that your kids, much younger than you realize, they need to be a part of that conversation too, because they might have viewpoints or opinions or thoughts that need to be validated through it. So that's number two. And number three is realize that divorce, if you do choose it, can be absolutely financially devastating for at least a generation. And this is a big thing. It may mean that your kids can't get financial aid in college. It could mean that your kids don't have the support for like getting a car or figuring out like the next steps to getting a job. So just make sure that you consider all of those possibilities. But sometimes divorce is still the best option and it's painful, but make sure you know exactly what it's going to mean for not just you, but your kids as well.
Yeah, that last comment you made about the finances, and it's something that we talk a lot about. And, getting to the point where you can get prepared to go into mediation versus litigation can save you tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you have to decide where you want to put your money. If you want to put your money in the pockets of the lawyers, great. Go into litigation, think that you can stick it to them and hurt them really badly in court, and that's going to make you feel a whole lot better that they're in pain. Guess what? You're both going to be in pain. You're both going to suffer because you're both going to be poor, and like you said, that money that you're giving to the lawyers because you can't come to an agreement will definitely affect your kids. And yes, it could prevent them from going to college because it might be their college fund that you're using to pay the lawyers. It might mean that, guess what? When you retire, you have to work 10 more years because you gave a lawyers $200,000. And I am not telling you those numbers like that they don't exist. People spend hundreds of thousands and sometimes millions of dollars in court. And sometimes it can take 12 years. I sat next to a woman the other day. It was $1.2 million and 12 years. And she says, all I ended up with was the house and the kids. I'm like, well, those are the kids are what's most important. And granted, if I had that much money to like give to somebody, like I would spend that on my kids, but I'm not going to spend 12 years of my life fighting over stuff, no, it's just stuff, it's not, and I'd much rather spend 12 years of my life trying to make money myself and not worry about, how how I deserve somebody else's money when I just gave a lawyer $1.2 million and sent their children to college.
Yeah. That's wait right there.
Yeah. I mean, it's taken away from your kid's college and giving it to the lawyer's college. So there's just alternative ways. So I really appreciate you bringing up the financial piece, because the two pieces to wanting to be better than bitter, the two pieces that we talk about is reducing the likelihood of long-lasting trauma for your children. That's why you want to be better than bitter. And number two is your finances, saving yourself money. Who wants to spend tens to hundreds and thousands of dollars and time on lawyer fees? Yeah. So I want to shift a little bit, because what I think is remarkable about you, being a college dropout, a single mother in poverty, the enterprise that you have built. And I just want for you to empower anybody out there who hasn't worked maybe in 10 years, 20 years, who maybe has been a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad and feels like, how am I going to support myself? Give them some amazing guidance on how to start being, maybe it's an entrepreneurial job that they start, a side gig, anything to make some money.
So one of the biggest things that I learned early on was, if I don't know something, I can learn it. And that was pretty big. And I think that anyone going through a divorce or post-divorce even, this is super helpful. If you can see it, and I actually think, Tanya, you've done a lot of this, like learning absolutely everything that comes into your path. This concept of, if there's like a degree curriculum, I can actually look those things up and learn them myself. If there is a module that is posted online, I can learn it myself. That was absolutely huge for me. And when I started building my business, it was really and truly, it was make or break. My husband and I, we were newly married, and we were both super poor. We were just so poor. We were just in love and happy, but we both had debt, lots of debt, nearly $100,000 in debt. And gosh, I think combined we were making like less than $40,000 a year. So no chance of ever paying off that debt. And I was like, we've got to figure out something. So I'm just going to figure something out and try. And I had a few different options that I was looking at. And for me, freelancing, taking on side gigs, clients, etc., was like the single best path for quickly monetizing. So I did.
And when you say taking on clients and doing, like, what were you taking? Like, what was your first gig? Like, what was it?
Oh, it was $15 an hour. It was marketing on social media for Mrs. Winter's Chicken and Biscuits. Yeah, and I was their marketing consultant, but they were like super new to their resurgence. And so, yeah, it was a low paying gig, and I learned so much through that. Mm-hmm.
So when you started, like, so did you have some experience in social media? Were you just kind of like a normal young 20-something person who was playing around with making videos and posting them? Like, how did you figure out like this was a skill set of yours?
Yeah, this was 11 years ago. So I was 24. I didn't even have my third kid yet. And I was actually working full time as a hairstylist. And Mrs. Winter's Chicken and Biscuits, the CEO's wife, came and sat in my chair for highlights. And I gave her the best highlights, and the super honest, but we started talking about like business and Shark Tank and understanding how to like make companies take off online. And she's like, could we hire you? And I was like, hire me? What? She's like, yeah, could we hire you for social media and marketing consulting? And I was like, this is crazy. You do know I've never done this before. And she's like, that's totally fine. I'd love to hire you. And so she hired me, and they actually instilled a lot of kind of confidence into me as a young 24 is such a baby still. And so it was one of the best decisions I've ever made.
And so you took that skill set and somebody took a chance on you, which is great. And we all, I talk about when I do some executive coaching, I talk about walking through doors that open for you.
Yes.
And that anybody who believes that they should have a concrete path is crazy, because it is really just about when opportunities come knocking. If you are one of those people who are like, yeah, I'll try it, I'll do it, walk through those doors. Because it's usually the doors that you're following a person. The woman that was sitting in front of you in your chair, you walked through that door because you were following her, right? You had some sort of faith in her, that she felt good about you. And you said you learned so much from that experience because you were surrounded by people who were supporting you. And I think that's really key. And anybody who's trying something new and trying to start a new endeavor, walk through those doors and don't worry about knocking on them too. My dad did this really amazing thing. Like he was an engineer, and he had a midlife crisis after his divorce and moved up to Vail, Colorado, and decided to teach skiing. He's got his PhD from MIT. And so he invented the first fiberglass tennis racket.
No.
Never made any good money on that because he wasn't a good businessman. He just was a really good engineer.
Yeah.
And he ended up working at a bike shop in the summers and teaching skiing in the winters, but he knew he couldn't support himself that way. So a guy walks in and he's helping him with his bikes, and he asked the guy what he did. And he's like, oh, I run this company called the Closet Factory. And my dad's like, what do they do? He's like, well, we design custom closets. We install custom closets. And my dad's like, I could do that. I'm an engineer. He's like, do you have anybody working up here? And the guy's like, well, I actually have to drive all the way up here from Denver every time we get a call for somebody wanting a closet. My dad's like, you should hire me. My dad worked for that company for 25 years and retired with them and made really good money and kind of oversaw. They did closets and garages and entertainment centers. He's a contractor. So when I tell people those stories, I say, you know what? Sometimes you just have to knock on that door. Other times the door opens, right? And you walked through that door. You walked through that open door. And then how did you take that to the next level, Rachel? How did you go from like that small little marketing job to like being this phenom online?
Well, so for starters, Mrs. Winter's Chicken and Biscuits, which I'm so grateful for still to this day. I started with them doing just odd jobs, $15 an hour, some marketing, some social media. And then over time, they were like, we want more. We want more of your time. We want more of your attention. Let's increase it to $2,500 a month. And I was like, okay, this is still my first job. This is fantastic. And we were growing everything, which is fantastic. Then from there, I actually jumped into working full time as a marketing manager of an 500 tech company. And that was a cool one. It was cool in that it was fun work. The actual work was kind of boring because it was switches and network hardware and all of.
You were promoting it on social media?
Yeah, it was rough. I was like, okay, we can get super creative here or super boring. Either will work. And then I just started securing clients at first $300 a month, and then $500 a month, $1,500 a month, $2,500 a month. It was right around the point where I switched to $3,500 to $4,500 a month that I learned the power of pivot with clients, where if you're not seeing a result quickly, you have to quickly pivot. So I always do this within about a month, and I'm like, oh, we got to change things up. It's not working. Let's get some things going. And that's when we started doing a lot with like ads and funnels and more with clients. It was basically like to whatever end, like we have to do what it takes to get the return for clients. And that's when I started being able to charge $7,500, $11,500, up to $25,000 a month. And it's because we pivot really fast versus a lot of agencies will take 3 to 6 months before they'll pivot and be like, oh, something isn't working. And I'm like, nope, we've got to make this happen fast, or else people, they're mad and it sucks and they've spent a ton of money and they're not getting results. So I'm a big believer in like, let's find the path to the ROI ASAP.
So if somebody's sitting and listening right now, they haven't worked in 10 years, but they are somebody who's on TikTok all the time. They are content creators, but they've never really thought about monetizing that. Could you give them a little bit of hope? Could you give them a little bit of direction to say like, hey, these are 5 things that you can do to monetize it? If like, how do I gain a following? You know, what could you give to them as a little bit of feeling like, okay, maybe I can go do this just to give myself some money in my pocket now?
So number one, if you've not done anything online yet and you don't know what your skill set is, take a look at some of the options available through like affiliate networks, whether it's TikTok. We'll see what happens with TikTok in the next few days, but TikTok Shop, or what is it called? It's Like to Know, LTK on Instagram. There are like a bunch of affiliate networks that have great products, like super great products that people want and that have done well for other people. Focus on those. That's number one if you have no other experience. Number 2 is ASAP, get something up in your bio that includes the ability to subscribe via email so that people, as they watch your videos, whether they're value, vulnerable, variety, viral, any of the above, they're able to subscribe and get onto your email list and be nurtured through email so you can make them offers. And that's number 2. Number 3, even though it technically touches on what I was just talking about, you have to create value-based emails and videos, all of the above. When you start sharing value about any area of expertise, like it helps the people that you serve on your email list and the people who come across you on social to feel so much more empowered by you specifically. Number 4, don't be scared to talk about other things. I'm a huge fan of like variety, like have some fun with it. Like talk about your new favorite recipe or how you discovered how like to organize your pantry because X, Y, and Z, this makes the most sense. And number 5, make sure that every single one of your emails has some type of call to action, whether it's in the PS or in the actual email.
Well, I just adore Rachel, and she's the reason why we've just connected is that, you know, I have put my faith in her in terms of helping Better Than Bitter grow so we can actually reach more people, because I really do firmly believe that we all need to have a more amicable divorce resolution. And as I always say, it doesn't mean that your divorce is going to feel warm and fuzzy during the process, but getting to the other side, having that amicable resolution, having an effective co-parenting relationship with your ex, making sure your children are feeling safe and loved, and that you don't drain all of your savings on a high contentious litigation battle. That is what we are all about. We're here to change the divorce dialogue. We're here to make sure that everybody out there has access to information and access to what I'm calling the new divorce, because there are a lot of resources out there that can get you even some paperwork that you can do on your own, or at least get you to a certain level before you have to get big lawyers involved. So I want to thank Rachel so much for coming on today and really sharing a story that she's never told anybody before about her parents' contentious divorce, and the fact that, you know, she has very strong opinions on what not to do in your divorce. But she also, I wanted her to give you hope and know that, like, even if you've never worked before, you haven't worked in 20 years, you have the ability to make something happen for yourself. You don't have to have a long resume of very specific, defined companies that you've worked for. So you can walk through those doors that either open for you or just go bang on them. If you've been taking care of kids, go be a nanny. If you've been a household manager, go work for Instacart or go be a personal assistant. If you have been caring for your elderly parents, go be a caretaker, or you could be a care consultant. I mean, that's a really amazing opportunity out there. There are so many families that need people who know how to navigate kind of the elderly care. And if you are somebody who's flipping through social media every day and you're back there making content, that's a skill set. And so capture that, figure out, listen to Rachel, sign up for Rachel's emails. She's got a plethora of information and so many tools that she can give you to make money online. So again, thank you to Rachel. Appreciate you being here. And for everybody who is interested, all of Rachel's information will be in the show notes. And don't forget to visit us at betterthanbitter.coach. So at the close of every episode, I'd like to give the 3 top tips of information that I got out of our interview. My interview with Rachel today was really just eye-opening. The first thing is that if you are getting a divorce and you have to plan on telling your children, make sure that you are the ones that are delivering that information to your children. And not only the ones delivering it, but doing it together as 2 parents who love their children and love their children unconditionally, and making sure that your children, when you are communicating about your divorce, know that it was not their fault. And also make sure you and your soon-to-be ex have a plan for the immediate future as to how this separation is going to affect your children. Where are they going to live in the short term? How are you going to be trading time with them? Parenting time. If there are immediate needs for you to separate physically, and there are going to be 2 households, make sure you're having a very deep conversation about that so it's communicated at the time that you tell your children about your divorce. Number 2, if you are in a volatile, abusive relationship, and for whatever reason, religious, or just the fact that you don't believe that you can afford to not be living under the same roof, just know that that volatile, violent relationship that you have with your soon-to-be ex, or even if you're just trying to stay in that marriage, that is what causes long-lasting emotional trauma on your children. So that volatile, that abusive relationship that you are holding on to, that is what could potentially really hurt your children in the long run. And the last one, if you're concerned about your livelihood, if you are concerned about how you are going to support yourself moving forward, don't be afraid to, 1, bang on doors, figure out what you are good at, and then go seek out that type of job opportunity. And number 2, if a job door opens for you, like it did for Rachel when she began just talking to the person she was cutting their hair, and they saw something in her that made them feel like she could do a job that they had. So make sure you're talking, make sure you're networking, make sure you are developing your own personal brand around the skill sets you do have. If you've been taking care of children, if you've been managing a household, if you take care of your elderly parents, if you are a great personal shopper. There's so many great ways these days that you can make a living. And so don't rely on applying to jobs as the only option for you. So thank you again for joining us at Better Than Bitter, and I hope those 3 tips were enlightening. Thanks for tuning in to Better Than Bitter, Navigating an Amicable Divorce. Whether you are at the beginning of your divorce journey, midway through, or even done, we want the stories from our guests to give you hope that an amicable resolution is possible. If you'd like to dive deeper into today's episode, check out our show notes for a full transcript, reflections, and links to learn more about Better Than Bitter's coaching, courses, and how to connect with our fabulous guests. If you're ready for more support, you can head over to betterthanbitter.coach. There you'll find details and additional information on our 5-step game plan multimedia course our one-to-one Zoom coaching, group coaching, monthly memberships, events and retreats, and a whole lot more. Plus, we've got a ton of free resources like our monthly newsletter, our private Facebook group, Instagram channel, and a library of articles and free webinars to help you along the way. When you go to our website, you'll be able to schedule a free 45-minute breakthrough call. Remember, we're here to help you reach an amicable resolution. Find your courage and believe in your brighter future. Because you know what? It is possible. At Better Than Bitter, we measure success by what we give and not by what we get. So let's change the divorce dialogue together. It's time to be better than bitter.